Okay, so next let's look at how we're going to join two pieces of fabric with a whip stitch. So to prepare my swatches, they're just 4 inches by 8 inches, but along my 8 inch edge, I folded back my desired seam allowances. So in my example, these are 5/8, and I've done that on each piece. And you'll want to notice that I folded um, back towards the wrong side. So when I'm looking at the seam allowance here, this is the right side of the fabric, this is the wrong side of the fabric. That way, when I join my fabrics right side together to sew my seam, and then once we're done sewing and we open it up, the seam should be mostly invisible on the right side of the fabric, and the seam allowances are going to be on the wrong side. Um, so once I have those folded, and I like to press them because they'll lay neater if you do. The next thing I also like to do is mark along one of my edges every 1/8 of an inch. This isn't strictly speaking necessary. You can do a whip stitch without marking the space of your stitches, but I like to do it because it keeps my stitches a little bit neater. Um, so to get ready, I'm going to just put my fabrics right sides together so that I can see my seam allowance on either side. And then I'm going to, starting on the side that's further away from me, I'm going to bring my threaded needle up underneath the seam allowance so that the knot is nestled in between the seam allowance and the fabric. That's just going to make sure it gets less wear and tear. And I'm going to come up through that fabric even with one of those dots that I placed on my fabric. Then I'm going to come directly across. In this case, my dots are marked on the piece of fabric closest to me, so I'm coming right through that dot, just right there, very, very close to the edge of the fold. The closer you put your needle through the edge of that fold, the less that your stitch is going to show on the right side of the fabric when you're done. So now I've come up through this seam allowance and then I've come across to the other side. And now we're going to start doing the actual whip stitch. We're always going to enter the two folds of fabric from the side that we started on, and we're going to exit from the side that's closer to us. So I'm going to catch both folds of fabric just right along the fold in line with my next little marking. Mine are 1/8 of an inch apart, so that'll cause my stitches to be 1/8 of an inch. And as you notice, sometimes your threads like to tangle. You have to stop and get them in line with one another. And then we're just going to repeat that same motion. I'm going to come in from the layer furthest apart from me and come through towards myself. As I start forming stitches, you'll see that by always entering the fabric layers from the same side, that our thread is wrapping around that folded edge, um, and that we're starting to get some diagonal little stitches. And so we're really just going to repeat this process over and over and over again until we've made it all the way to the other edge of our fabric. And thread will be thread, so it will continue to try and tangle. The best thing you can do, maybe not the best thing, but one important thing to do is just anytime you're getting those tangles, stop and fix them as soon as they're starting. It's a lot easier to fix them when you just have um, one tangled stitch, as opposed to if you've moved on a few stitches and you're trying to sort out the tangle across all of them. So you'll also notice, in addition to using the little 1/8 inch marks to keep my stitches evenly spaced lengthwise, how close you're putting your needle in and through the fabric on the fold is also going to kind of help. Um, it's going to determine the evenness of your stitches as they're showing on the outside. So you want to try to be as consistent as you can be in keeping your needle moving through those folded edges as close to the edge as possible. Obviously, the more experience you have, the more you practice, the more seams you sew using the whip stitch, the more even and consistent your stitches will become. Okay, so as we are approaching the end of our seam, um, we're going to um, finish off similar to how we started on this last stitch. Instead of coming all the way through um, the folded layers, I'm going to catch the fold that's further away from me, but then I'm going to come up inside the seam allowance that's closer to me, and pull through, so that as I tie my knot, that my knot is nested in the seam allowance again. And then I can trim off. And then I should be able to see, looking at the edge, I've got lots of little diagonal stitches. And then when I open up my fabric, it's pretty invisible on the right side. Looks like I've got one stitch there that was a little too far from the fold, and it's a little more visible on the outside, but it's a great way to connect two layers, to fix a seam maybe that's coming out on a piece of clothing. Also, obviously, using a matching thread as opposed to a contrasting thread will make it a lot more invisible. So there you have it on how to do a whip stitch.